All right, everybody, welcome back to the Learning Out Loud podcast. I'm your host, Dustin William. I have my co-host with me, Whitestone.
I shall now attempt to show how the most important of these principia have been crystallized into the pithy form of maxims and have influenced and developed that grand system of truth known as equity jurisprudence.
The power is neutral. It's sitting in the quintessence until you invoke it. All right, welcome everybody back to the Learning Out Loud podcast. I am your host, Dustin William, owner and producer over at True Life Productions. You can find all of our content at truelifeproduction.com. Go check out All Aboard, where I get into the orphan trains. And I was actually just on the Forbidden Knowledge News. Well, it'll be a while ago now that this is out, but I was on the Forbidden Knowledge News Network to give it was an hour-long episode on the hidden origins of the orphan trains, which goes right along with my All Aboard research. Go check that out at Forbidden Knowledge News Network on YouTube. And then you can head to Article 3 Articulations, where you can find the most comprehensive breakdown of the slaughterhouse cases there is on the internet. And from there, you can head to the ThoughtCon Dojo and check out everything that I am researching, which I'm actually in the middle of kind of revamping right now. I just, we'll probably get into it a little bit later, but I did just get a new system of note-taking. We might actually do a whole show on note-taking. That's because I find it so interesting now. But anyways, so I'm revamping some stuff, but I'm going to make it far more comprehensive and easier for everyone to follow along with. So that's it for the business. Let's introduce our co-host, Whitestone. How's it going, man?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to get into these commentaries here. They're stated very plainly and very
Yeah,
easy to understand.
yeah. Once you read them, there really is no room for argument on what equity is and what equity is not, because he really covers the whole gambit. And yeah, I'm excited to get into it too. There's just so many gems in this literature, especially from Joseph's story. He's probably one of the easiest ones to read, I would say. Um,
Yeah, I completely agree. When I read his commentaries on the Constitution, you really cannot put it in any more plain language than that. And a lot of people I think kind of get afraid of books from the 1800s, 1900s. Like, it's so hard to read. But in
mm,
my opinion, that period of time between like the 1700s and like the 2000s, where on one hand in the early 2000s language is really degraded. In the 1700s you still got a lot of that old English kind of 16 1700s, you have that old English influence. The 18 and 1900s, they wrote and spoke in such a way that is so pragmatic and so easy to read. Once you get used to it, you can't read anything else.
yeah, I 100% agree. I was actually just talking to somebody about this the other day, where they're like, I was telling them I read a bunch of Supreme Court decisions and stuff, and they're like, "Oh man, that stuff is hard to read from back then." I'm like, actually, the further you go back, the easier it is to read law.
Yes. And the more words you know, the easier it is. If you just keep a law
Yeah.
dictionary like Bouvier's or Ballantyne's while you're reading these things, it, yeah,
Yeah, and I
can't.
live by the philosophy, the more words you know, the smarter you are. That's all you have to do to
That's
be
all
a
it takes.
smarter. Yeah, just know more words.
Yep.
That's it. Yep. Yeah, so yeah, I think this is going to be a good show. Um love Mr. Story, love equity, and man, what a great way to wrap up this little series that we did, finishing up Tully's speech last week. This was actually pretty epic here, man. We did quite a bit of research into these equity
Yeah,
maxims.
we really have. And I'm glad we actually started out with a speech from an attorney of and president of the Bar Association
Hmm. Hmm.
first, because he's putting it in even more plain language, I think easier to understand than what Pomeroy or Story would be. But once you go through and you understand Tully's speech, and then you go back and you start reading Pomeroy or you start reading Joseph's Story, it's just going to click,
Yeah.
line after line after line. And so I'm glad we started where we did.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And the best thing about it is that's going to be evergreen content. These first 10 episodes are going to, it doesn't matter what time period you're in, they're always going to be relevant. And I
Yes.
I really wanted to put a lot of thought into that for us opening this up, especially since they are going to be free and you guys can really see what we have to offer here. Because I do think it's more important to be accurate in your research today than it ever has been. And especially when, we're entering into the age of AI and all of these deceptions going on with the wars and everything. Accuracy is really important and source material is also really important. And that's what I'm trying to bring to the table and I'm really trying to foster here is, a group of just people who are interested in freedom, and the creator, which go hand in hand. And opening up with the that speech and the maxims of equity really sets the tone, I think, on what we're trying to do here. So, yeah. So, without further ado, I guess we'll get into what we're going to talk about today. And So, you know me, I every Sunday I'm sitting here reading the Bible, trying to see what I can get out of it. So today we are going to start off with another Bible passage, one that I find very interesting, and just reading this Geneva Bible and contrasting it with the King James version, I think is just so interesting because of these just little itty bitty changes in words that are all over the place. The more I read it, the more I find them and the more interesting they get. So, what I was reading today is I'm still on my study of redemption in the Bible. There's 33 stories, ironically, which is hilarious. But there's 33 redemption stories in the Bible. I'm on. I kind of had them laid out in chronological order that they happen in the Bible for me. So I started with everything in the New Testament, started with Genesis, and I'm making my way all the way up to Revelation. And so I'm in the book of Luke right now, and the redemption story is the lost sheep, coin, and son. And this is a great story. I like it. It's just a good parable of Jesus talking to uh, to his followers. So here in and this is just a little note that I took. This is something I really liked about the first passage. So in Luke 15, 1 through 10, Jesus Christ is he's talking to Luke 15:2. Therefore the Pharisees and scribes murmured, saying, he receiveth sinners and eat with them. So basically the Pharisees and the unbelievers are saying, like, why is the Christ eating with these lower people, the sinners, and why is he receiving them? And so Jesus responds, what man of you, having 100 sheep, if he loose on them, doeth not leave 99 and go into the wilderness and go after that which is lost until he find it? And when he hath found it, he lay it on his shoulders with joy. And he cometh home, he calleth together his friends and neighbors, saying unto them, rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost. And I love that because I love Jesus Christ. He's just pointing out here that, you can go astray and still find redemption in Jesus Christ, which is 100% true in my life. I have accepted Jesus in my life, and He has accepted me, and that's why I love this parable. I'm not going to Bible thump too much, but I did want to give that context right there because of the specific Bible passage that I found that there's so much contrast in between the Geneva Bible and the King James Version. So we'll start off with Luke 15:7 from the Geneva Bible. And this is the wording from the Geneva Bible. I say unto you that likewise joy shall be in heaven for one sinner that converteth. Joy shall be in heaven for one sinner that converteth, more than 99 just men which need none amendment of life. Which I find that little phrasing, amendment of life, right there, very interesting. Have you ever heard that before?
Amendment of life.
Yeah.
Interesting. No, I
Yeah.
have not heard of it. Say unto you that likewise joy shall be in heaven for one sinner that converteth, more than 99 just men which need more amendment of life. Like
Yeah.
they need to change their ways.
Exactly, exactly. And that's how it's worded in the Geneva Bible, which something very interesting I just found out about John Calvin, who was the one who wrote the Geneva Bible. Did you know this? He after he studied theology, he actually went to another college to study law.
Interesting.
Very,
Okay, so when up here on the screen, when you're drawing the distinction between, like, let's just say the last appended piece of the sentence, both in the King James Version and the Geneva Bible. The Geneva Bible said, which need none amendment of life, which means they
Mhm.
don't need to kind of change or amend their life. In the King James Version, it said, which need not repentance,
Yes, that's the exact
which is
distinction I
almost
wanted to.
different because
Yes.
repentance almost seems like that's what you would do on the at law side. You have to admit and you have to confess and you have to step up to the bar and say, yes, I did it. Whereas in the Geneva Bible says, no, 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 brother, just change your life. Just
Yeah, you
amend
need
what
to
you're doing.
amend your life. Stop what you're doing now and change
Yep.
it. Not re
One is
Yeah.
written in the spirit of equity and one is kind of tiptoeing away from it, it feels like.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think it's so because they took converteth out too, and they replaced converteth with repenteth also. So
Yeah,
it's just,
interesting.
yeah, they don't want you to convert or amend. They want you to repent.
Yeah, it's like, no, no, don't change what you're doing. I need you to stand in front of me and admit that you did it.
Exactly. Yeah, I thought when I read that this morning, I was, man, it just blew me. And the reason I picked up my King James Bible, because I have a Geneva and a King James, both physical. Actually, my King James is from 1887. I love this Bible. But so I picked that one out and I was like, I wonder if this verse is different in the King James because of amendment of life. And I got in there and I was like, oh, of course it's different. Of course it
Of
is.
course, it's different.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, and then knowing that John Calvin actually, after he studied theology, went and studied law, and when he was studying law, that's actually what sparked him to write the Geneva Bible because he started reading the Bible like he read law. So
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I knew you would love that. I thought that was such an interesting little point there. And
I need to get a copy. Where did you get your Geneva Bible, by the way?
actually, at BAM Books a Million, it was the only one they had on the shelf. I was like, I just prayed and I said, God, if they have a Geneva Bible here, I'm gonna buy it. And it was literally the only one on all of the shelves in the whole store. So
Okay, well, I'm going to the bookstore. I'm going to the corporate chain bookstore after this to see if they got a copy.
yeah, dude, I'm telling you, man, start digging it. It's great. It is great. I love it. Do you have a? You have a? Oh yeah, you have that Masonic Bible too. That's a King
Yeah,
James,
I
right?
have I have an original Masonic Bible from from the 50s, which if anyone asks that I have it, I lost it in a boating accident. But
Nice.
because
Uh,
apparently, from what I've heard, that the when a Mason passes, the lodge comes to collect their effects that were issued by the lodge.
sounds like some Jesuit shit right there.
At least that's what because when my grandfather passed away, who was a Mason, that's what the lodge did there is they helped the estate sail. They put on they put on the funeral, and they also collected the apron and a couple other things. But some things slipped through the cracks, which I have.
Yeah, interesting. You know what, man? It's so funny. So I was remodeling someone's house. I was redoing their floor, and they made it was an old couple, and this guy was moving to Florida. He had to move out. It was a very sad thing, actually. But as I was moving all of his effects out of the house, I just so happened to come across he had a bunch of 33rd degree masonry paperwork.
Oh, what?
Scottish Rite Freemason. Yeah, he was a
No kidding.
33rd degree. Yeah, dude, and look, I jacked the shit. I'm not gonna lie, I took it. And but my freaking
No, you
ex,
saved it. You saved
I
it for
did.
preservation for posterity. That's what you
That
did.
is literally what I was doing, but my ex threw it away. I was so fucking mad, dude. She just threw those valuable documents right in the trash. It was
I would
I
never be.
wanted to cry. I wanted to
I'd
cry.
never be the same.
I wanted to cry so bad because it was all
I
there,
would
dude.
that I would be working then 12 hours at the landfill, kind of looking for stuff.
Yeah, oh
Well,
man. Yeah, I wanted to cry so bad. But yeah, anyways, I thought that was super interesting and why I encourage people to read your Geneva Bible because that is the Bible of the Protestant Reformation And it's different, man. There's different words in that Bible than there are the KJV. And I've just proven it to you right here. And well, I've done this on 3 or 4 of this series, actually.
Yeah.
Um,
And,
yeah.
I've seen people make connections between who Shakespeare actually was,
No.
and the fact that whoever that was also had a hand in the KJV.
Yeah, which Francis Bacon is who I think it was.
Yes. And which makes sense because I know we've talked about this before. It's a little bit of a sidecar, but it's relevant
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
initially what the Masons were responsible for was upholding the moral and ethical precepts of the church in the early days by putting on shows and theater. And so it would make sense that if Masonry is in fact attached to the Shakespearean plays, and that person was actually Francis Bacon, it follows that the KJV would just be a continuation of whatever they were trying to achieve and whatever they were trying to convey during the Shakespeare plays, which is why it's written the way that it is in the hand, and I guess the jurisprudence or the juris interpretation of a Mason.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that's so yeah, it's interesting that you say that too, because I actually have in my all aboard series. Have you ever heard of the Astor Place riot?
Astor as an Astor?
Yes.
No,
Yes.
I have not.
So this was in 1848, and I think that was an alchemical event that they used Shakespearean plays to get everything going with. I have
Oh, absolutely. And
yeah.
that goes into a lot of the false flag stuff and a lot of the things we
Mhm.
see in the media and everything else. It always follows a script, and you can definitely find where that script is in the old theaters.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but basically they were doing Macbeth, and the story of Macbeth was basically the story of this Ned Buntline guy. He was the hero, and he led this pack against the tyranny of the crown and stuff. And it's all allegorical. I didn't spell it out exactly as good as I wanted to, but yeah, that was the idea I had going behind it. So yeah,
Well,
everybody should go check that out.
they really should check it out because if you think about the public school system, it's like, why are we having to read Othello? Why are we having to read Macbeth? Why are we having to read Romeo and Juliet? It's because they're telling you, boys and girls, when you become adults, these are the scripts that are going to be running in the background, and we have to tell you contractually.
Yeah, and it's hilarious because the real story of Macbeth in the background is if you dig through if you get rid of all of the bullshit at the end of the story, the moral of the story is the British crown never loses.
Hey, the house always wins,
The
right?
house always wins. That's the moral of the freaking story, dude. And I spell that out in my series. Actually, I pull in another guy. Oh, what's his name? He's got a whole podcast on this. What is the name of that? Um, Oh, I can't remember it. I wish I could shout him out because it's a really good podcast. He digs really deep into all this stuff, and he's got a cameo in there. I put like 3 minutes of one of his shows in one of the My All Aboard shows, so you'll be able to find out who it is. Then you got to go check it out. Go watch my content. Go watch All Aboard. So, anyways, that's enough about that. Let's get into the show today. Which I wanted this show to kind of be a little more free form and a little more loosey goosey, I guess, because this is the end of our equity maxim series, and we have finished Holy Speech. So now we're just getting into some supplemental information, and I wanted to get into what we're going to get into today because there's been a debate going on in the law community online every day for basically since since the internet has existed that about the differences between law and equity, and is there a difference, and does equity even exist, blah blah blah, all of this nonsense. And we talked about it a little bit on last week's show on we did bring a Supreme Court case to the fold that irrefutably proves that the federal courts still have equity just like they did in 1789 when the Constitution was originally written.
Yeah, and that's
And
the Judiciary Act. So it's
exactly, yeah,
come on.
yep, yep. So and then so they mentioned that in there, and then I do believe Story even actually in chapter 2 of this book actually brings up or maybe it's the editor's notes. They bring up the Judiciary Act, and he says the exact same thing, and he says it's not going to change. It can't change. It's universal. So that's why I wanted to really bring this to the fold because I wanted to bring primary source documentation, and I do consider Story a primary source. One, because he was a Supreme Court justice for 32 years. He trained under John Marshall, another a savant, And Story is cited more in equity cases. It's basically Story and Pomeroy. Those are the two guys that they cite. So I consider Story a primary source. Would you consider Story a primary source too?
Absolutely. I mean, if the Supreme Court alludes to or borrows or quotes from Story or from Pomeroy, absolutely, in the context in which we are living, it is source material because that is where they are drawing the principles from.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it too. So we're not going to get a more authoritative source than we are here. And the reason I bring this up is because in these first two chapters, we were going to go through the first three chapters, but I think that would have been way too much. So we're just going to go through the first two. And in these first two chapters, this debate must have been going on since the very beginning of the Constitution being written, because Story tells in here, as we'll get into it, you'll see Story is just, he takes a lot of care in this first chapter to really dispel all of the myths of equity. So to me, this debate has been going on since then, and then and it was still going on in 1918 because this W.H. Lyons Jr., the editor of the 14th edition here, he felt it important to re-release this edition and add his own commentaries about equity, and he agrees with Story on everything he says. So, unless you got anything to add to that, I think we can get right into the material now.
No, I will just add there's nothing new under the sun. And that means that the arguments that people are having today about whether or not God exists or whether or not equity exists, the same arguments were happening during this time. And he felt it prudent to update and show that equity is still running, it does still exist. And you mentioned the year 1918, and I just want to make a reference back to the book that I kind of blazed through, Law, Banking, and Business. It even states in there, it's talking about mortgages and promissory notes and contracts and things of that nature, but it makes several references to the, if you need this done or you want to achieve this, the courts of law are not going to be able to help you. You must go to a court of equity.
Nice. I love it. Yeah.
And it even states in there that there are things on the at law side that absolutely cannot be done, and the remedy is going to be inequity. So even in 1918, there's a second source right there that says it. So everybody's been having this argument for a long time, and that's what we're going to get into.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like this is just another cycle, a cycle upon a cycle, and I thought maybe this is the part we're playing now. It's the cycle is also, it's taken its course again, and it's our job to bring back equity into the fold. You know,
Yep.
that's how I see it, anyways. That otherwise I wouldn't be on this microphone here because there is a purpose to what we're doing here, and it is divinely inspired. I pray to my Creator to give me the words to inspire you guys to go out and do your own research, and so you can come into the fold with us and we can all be free together, because I think Whitestone will agree with me here. What we are living through right now is fucking crazy, and it needs to come to an end. So
it really is, and you always should return to that which is timeless and true, regardless of what's happening to you, because or in the world.
Amen.
We really cannot make a massive difference in the way that the world is going, except in our own lives. And the way that you do that is, accepting God, accepting spirit, accepting goodness and righteousness, and living accordingly to it, because that's where the change starts.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And a good way to get there is through studying equity maxims. As we totally talked about it, it's just a moral good compass, and Story talks about it in his literature too. So, if people are looking for a place to start, right here it is.
Yep, and it's very. You'll learn the language of equity by reading equity. I know it seems counterintuitive.
Yep.
But it's just like a second language. Once you pick up that language, you start thinking and speaking in that language sometimes. And it's the same with equity. And if you learn the language of equity, you will be set for life.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, these are principles for life. And even the editor here, he tells you later in this book, equity is universal.
Yes.
It's everywhere. Everywhere, no matter what, all the time. It's there. It was there before the law. It's going to be here after the law. So, without further ado, let's start getting into to this book. And we're going to kind of riff it today. I got a bunch of notes that I took out of this book, but it is 59 sections. So if you guys really want the full context of this, you really need to go read this book yourself, read the first three chapters, and these books aren't meant to be read cover to cover. That's why they're broken up into sections. So, what I would suggest you do is I would read the first three chapters, and then I would read in volume two, I would read chapter 33 on implied trust. Because if you have the context of the first three chapters and then you have the context of the implied trust, then everything that's happening today is going to make a lot more sense to you. Because we're living in a world of what I think is spendthrift trusts, more accurately than assess decay. But we can get into that later. But just have that be context for you as we go through this. And so let's get into it. What I want to start off with is the preface to the 14th edition, because so Joseph Story, what we're pulling out of is Commentaries on Equity Jurisprudence, Volume 1. And the author is Joseph Story. We talked a little bit about him earlier. He was an equity savant. I mean, just savant, period. He wrote endless amounts of literature. He wrote over 300 Supreme Court decisions, and I mean, I think 20 books. He's got a book just on municipal law, just on promissory notes, just on bills of exchange. He's got 2 volumes on equity jurisprudence. He's got a volume on equitable remedies. How many commentaries on the constitutions do he have? 3, I think.
I think it's a two. I have a 2 volume version of the commentaries on the Constitution.
Okay, so maybe it's 2 volumes on commentaries on the Constitution, but
Depends on what version you get, but yeah,
right,
generally
yeah,
1 to 2.
yeah. But I mean, either way, this man has endless amounts of literature. You could probably spend the rest of your life just reading him and not be done with it. But and we just love this guy. So, um, he wrote this book in 1836. Okay, that was the first edition of this book was 1836. So then all the way in, we talked about it on a few episodes ago. Actually, we talked about a Supreme Court justice has cited the 14th edition of Commentaries on Equity Jurisprudence by Joseph Story, and we had talked about how I couldn't find a 14th edition. But through diligent seeking and a little help from the AI machines, they actually found it for me on Google Books. The first 2 editions, anyways. I have the first 2 editions. If anybody can find the volume 3 of the 14th edition, or I have the first 2 volumes. Sorry, if anybody could find volume 3 of the 14th edition, that would be great. But anyways, I wanted to read the 14th edition to see if there had to see what had changed, to see why this guy had updated this version all the way in 1918, because there are some things that have changed. But so I started digging into the 14th edition, and he has a preface to the 14th edition that I'm just going to read this into the record verbatim. So, during the 32 years that I have elapsed since the publication of the last edition of this work, numerous and varied theories, practices, and versions have been wrought and welded into the field of equity jurisprudence. The general principles, however, have remained the same. It has been interesting to the editor to note the constant growth and increasing value of the particular forms and remedies afforded in this branch of jurisprudence in the enforcement of rights of parties. Some of the principles stated have received but slight use in practice in the enforcement and preservation of justice. Excuse me. And in some, the importance of the principle and the growth of the particular subject is readily apparent from a casual examination of the cited cases. The purpose of the editor has been to select from the great mass of decisions the leading cases directly bearing upon and illustrative of the topic of sections under consideration. The editor is of the opinion that to attempt to improve upon the original utterances and writings of Mr. Justice Story would be futile, and I agree. For the continued value and favor with which his expressions have been received by the courts is evidenced in the editor's search of the more recent adjudicated cases in which his expressions upon the question under consideration have been adopted and stated by the most learned courts as the law of the land today. The additions to the text by the present editor are enclosed in brackets. Oh, so he did say that. So yeah, all of his additions are enclosed in brackets. And so I wanted to read this and see what he had to say about Mr. Story's work. And I will admit, I was happy with what he had to say. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Oh, oops. That is not where I wanted to go. Okay. So, You got anything you want to add to that before we start going through these sections?
No, let's get into it.
All right, cool. So here, Justice Story starts out on the nature and character of equity. And in these first few sections, there is a lot of Latin, which I did have translated, and we'll go through a lot of it because I do think it adds a lot of good context to the argument. And basically, what he's doing here in this first chapter is he is explaining the true nature and character of equity jurisprudence. And he's dispelling a lot of the myths, and he even talks about how there's a lot of learned judges out there that get this subject wrong. So, here in section 1, he states, "For it cannot be disguised that an imperfect notion of what in England constitutes equity jurisprudence is not only common among those who are not bred to the profession, but that it has often led to mistake and confusion in professional treaties on the subject." And yeah, that's true. You will go through, and he cites a few people in here that just get it wrong, just get the idea wrong. But in the most general sense, we're accustomed to call equity, which in human transaction is founded in natural justice, in honesty and right, and which is properly arises ex quo et bono. And that is what is just, right, and true, right, Whitestone? We just went through that last week. I'm trying to remember off the
Yeah,
top of my head.
it's to make just, to make right, and to make true, basically to level out the disparities between two parties, I guess
Okay.
is kind of what that would mean.
So that is how equity arises, is ex quo et bono. And in a sense, it answers precisely the definition of justice or natural law as given by Justinian in the Pandex. And the Pandex is it's Roman equity. And Justinian was a chancellor in Roman equity. So but I think these Latin statements right here are very interesting because he is a Roman chancellor. And he states in Latin here, justice is the constant and perpetual will to render to each his own. Law is spoken of in several ways. In one sense, that which is always equitable and good is called law, such as the natural law. The precepts of the law are these: to live honorably, to harm no one, to render to each his own. Law is the art of the good and the equitable, which I really like that definition that he gives, especially coming from the Roman side.
I do too. That last one, law is the art of the good and equitable. In order to have an art form based off of something, that art form has to come second, right?
Mm.
Because the art
Hmm.
form is the art form is the expression of an already existing principle. And so in here, when it says law is the art of the good and equitable, that means that the good and equitable precede law. So therefore, when you practice law, it is based on something bigger, which is the principles of equity and
Yeah.
morality and justice and all of those precepts.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, because yeah, art is really the final form of your idea. So before it's art is really built off of everything before it, which yeah goes right along with the equitable principles. That's a great, yeah, that's a
And when you
great
lose
point.
equitable principles and you keep doing art, your art ends up being terrible. Like most art today
Yeah,
is
yeah,
not based on natural principles. It's not based on any of the art that has come to us in the preceding centuries. It's just arbitrary. That's why you have people taping bananas to walls and calling it art. Is because the original principles upon which art are usually reflecting, or what art reflects, are gone. And so
Man, yeah, that is no, that's such a great point. That's why art sucks today because they're not using nature. They're not.
art nowadays, to me, is just harassment. That's
That's a
it's visual, it's ocular harassment is what it is.
assault, ocular assault. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's so funny. But yeah, yeah, I would agree that man, that that's funny. All right. Anyways, moving on to the next section here. I really like what Story states here. Um, Even in the Roman law, which is justly thought to deal to a vast extent in matters ex quia bono, never affected so bold a design. He's talking about equity. On the contrary, it left many matters of natural justice wholly unprovided for, from the difficulty of framing any general rules to meet them, and from the doubtful nature of the policy of attempting to give a legal sanction to duties of imperfect obligations. So he's basically saying there with even how big the Roman law was, and that's what the kind of law that we know the best. Even with how big that was, it never affected so bold a design as equity jurisprudence, obviously, because equity jurisprudence is built on top of the Roman law. And there's more. He goes on to who is this that's stating the Roman law. Oh, there's some more Latin down here. When no cause underlays an agreement, it is settled that an obligation cannot be established thereby. Therefore, a naked agreement does not give birth to an obligation, but one who is promised without cause cannot bring a contradiction to recover a sum he did not pay, only the obligation himself. Oh, what is in the context? Thus, it was well known that the Roman law. Sorry, we're learning out loud here, guys. I forgot what the context of those were in. I should have wrote it down here.
I think it's saying, because that one was under the Roman law was inadequate. And so, well, and what's interesting here is in Law, Banking, and Business, also from 1918, it said it uses these exact same words when it talks about obligations. When there's no cause that underlies an agreement, it's settled that an obligation cannot be established. So basically, if you got a naked agreement between you and somebody else, there's no consideration, there's no contract, it's really not enforceable, and there is no obligation.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, yeah. And then he goes on to state here to draw the differences between the civil and natural. It is scarcely necessary to add that it is not in this latter sense any more than in the broad and general sense above stated, which Eliaf has with great propriety denoted natural equity, because it depends on and is supported by natural reason. The later falls appropriately under the head of civil equity. So there he's pointing out the distinction between obviously natural equity and Roman equity, which would be considered the civil equity. So, and that's what when one of our teachers talks about this, when they get when we talk about these people out here that do get remedy on the outlaw side, that's what they're getting is Roman equity, because the judge has that kind of discretion.
Yeah, it's more of like administrative equity. It's like,
Yeah.
look, we can't look at you like the natural man, the natural person, but we are endowed with equity powers. So we'll give you as much equity as we can on the outlaw side, and equity agrees that equitable remedy is adequate. I think is kind of what the overall theme.
And we're just sick of fighting with you. Get out of my courtroom, please.
Yeah, it's like, look, I'm just gonna, because administrative equity is equity. It is a remedy.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But it's not a repeatable remedy on any way, shape, or form. Yeah. So, which is my whole point behind it. Sure, you can get remedy that way if you just grit your teeth and fucking get through it, but it's not repeatable in any way, shape, or form. So,
and it really is not. I don't think it should be, because really, if you're going to govern your own life, then you should be the one fighting for the equity in that case, and it shouldn't be so universal, and it shouldn't be public and available to everybody, because in that situation, you are an individual trying to get equity, and that's what equity sees as the individual. They're not out to give things to groups and masses of people. So if it's not repeatable by somebody else, that's because that was not their situation.
Yeah, and I guess that even goes to the whole equity jurisprudence thing, because there's just story talks about this too. Every equity case is adjudicated on its own merits. So
Yes.
even when you do get into equity, you really have to do it yourself, and that's why our teacher talks about this too. Freedom has to be on an individual basis. We all got into this on our own. We all signed these contracts of adhesion. We all got these attachments on our own, and now we have to do this. We have to get out on our own. And that's why I really want to foster that kind of environment here of people who actually want to read these books, who actually want to research, who actually want to find a remedy, not just go out there and complain. And when there is a remedy, block people on Facebook and put their head in the sand. That's what I'm trying to avoid because it is possible for all of us. And this stuff is so simple to understand. And I'm hoping by going through these first two chapters, that's what I'm really trying to get through here is this stuff isn't as big and scary as people think it is. The Roman law is big and scary for sure. That shit's terrifying, but equity's not. And equity stands above the Roman law. So moving on to the next section, this is actually one of my favorite sections here in the first chapter because this is the definition that I use for equity. When people ask me what equity is, this is what I tell them. Thus, Aristotle has defined it, the very nature of equity, to be the correction of the law wherein it is defective by reason of its universality. I think that's the most concise, to the point definition of equity that you can get.
Yep. So when that shirt says one size fits most and it doesn't, equity comes in as the tailor and makes it right.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Great analogy. That's awesome. And he states here, the same sense is repeatedly recognized in the Pandex. And he goes on in Latin. This is what the Latin says. In all things indeed, but most of all law, equity ought to be observed. Whenever equity, the reason of natural desire, or doubt of law causes delay, the matter must be tempered by just decrees. It has been resolved that in all things, the reasoning of justice and equity is to be preferred above that of strict law. And I love that because that is coming from the Roman side of the law. That's what the Pandex is. That's like the Roman side of the law.
So you even have, our alleged source of all of our law, the Romans are saying it too. So I don't understand why a lot of these people think that there's not a distinction and separation between law and equity.
Well, it is because they've never read the first three chapters of commentaries on equity jurisprudence, so they have no
And they won't.
basis. And they
They
won't,
won't.
and they won't because they don't actually want a remedy. They don't actually want a solution to their problem. They want to
No,
go
they're
out there.
looking for a fight. That's what it is. They're looking for a
Exactly.
fight.
They're not
They
looking for
want like
yeah.
it's like, oh, I'm gonna go fight the government. They're evil. They're coming after us. I'm gonna hunker down. And they don't want to see that it's like actually if you just step 2 inches to the left, you're in the light and you're fine. You can put down your implements of war.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is your life is so much more peaceful once you do. Because I used to be one of those guys. Like I'm going in fighting to the
Absolutely.
death, dude. Like fuck this. And then I found equity, and I'm like, oh, there's a way better way to do this shit.
It's like, oh, you mean I can literally just walk away?
Right. Yeah. Just say, hey, that's not me. Thanks, but no thanks. Have a nice day.
Yep.
And that's what equity is. And he who seeks equity must, as long as you're doing equity, because he who seeks equity must do equity. You got to clean your side
Yep.
of the street. But that's why you got to get right with the creator first too, because that's just a prerequisite to me. But anyways, moving on to section 4 here. If any case should happen that is not regulated by some express or written law, it should have for a law natural principles of equity, which is the universal law extending to everything. And another Latin and some more Latin from the Pandex, the Roman side of the law. Equity suggests or prompts, not commands, not overrides. The verb suggerit implies equity operates as a guide to conscience, not the blunt instrument of. Oh, this is one of my notes. The have equitis suggeste, that is equity suggests a prompt, not command, not overrides. And then the verb suggesta implies equity operates as a guide to conscience, not a blunt instrument of correction. This is the Chancellor's voice, reasoned, measured, and persuasive. And then moving on, the more Latin, even though we may be defective in law, the subjecti defecarium is deliberate. It acknowledges the gap without condemning the law. The law is not wrong. It is simply insufficient for the case at hand, which goes back to what we were just talking about. Every equity case is founded on a very individual basis.
Look at that. Look at that editor's note right beneath that. New frauds will never outpace equity. Precedence will be a constant guide, but never a bar.
Yep. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I
Wow.
pulled that out too. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. Yep, I love that. And then I have something wrote down for footnote 3 here. It is not necessary since the change in the Constitution to our courts, the blending of the two systems of law and equity, and the radical, though useful and practical innovations in pleadings and in practice and procedures of the courts, that a plaintiff who resorts to equitable remedy for the protection of his rights and redress of grievance should first reduce his claims to judgments and exhaust his legal remedies by execution or other appropriate processes. As under the old system, this is not required to be done, but the right will be administered and full relief given in one action. So, did you catch what that was saying there? Um,
Basically, it's basically saying that they should exhaust their remedies at law.
no, he's saying that you don't have to do that.
Oh, right.
So
It's not so you don't need something at law in order to get into the equity courts.
right, he's saying that under the old system you did, but now but America has actually modified equity to where that's not true, but this is not required to be done, but the right will be administered and full relief granted in one action. So instead of you having to get an action at law and then go to an equity court, they're just going to do both at the same time, basically through an administrative process.
Yep.
Yeah, which I thought that's going off of the editor's note right there. So he really added some spice to this in uh in 1918. I was really satisfied with what I was seeing in here. Um, so moving on to section 5, jurisdiction of the praetor. The jurisdiction of the praetor doubtless had its origins and its applications of equity as contradistinguished from mere law. Even when, with its extensive power, equity cannot disregard or overthrow positive law. And I put footnote 3 on that one too. But yeah, basically, just more bolstering the point here. The jurisdiction of the praetor doubtless had its origins in the application of equity as contradistinguished from mere law. And we're going to get a little bit further into that moving on. Section 2. From this method of interpreting laws by reason of them arises what we call equity. Equity, in its true and genuine meaning, is the soul and spirit of all law. Positive law is construed, and rational law is made by it. And we've all heard the term positive law, right? That's the written down law. But how many of us have heard the term rational law? You don't hear that in a court a whole lot, do you?
Well, I mean, rational law implies that there's an acknowledgement of something called discernment and reason, which is, which is a faculty that all human beings have when they're standing in the light of God. And you can only have those principles if you're on that side,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
or if you recognize it. And so really what they're pointing to is there is a source of reason and rationale that exists within the human heart, and that's what rational law is.
yeah. Yeah, and and I love it. And this is actually going to tie into our series that we're going to get into next, because after these, since our equity series is done here in these first two episodes are, if these first 10 episodes are done here, we're actually going to move into the trivium next. And so from what I've been studying now, is I'm kind of making the connection is that the positive law is kind of the grammar of law. That's the grammar. That's the initial part of doing research and learning. That's the grammar part of it. That's the positive law. And then the logic part of the law is actually figuring out the rights and remedies that are appropriate for the case. And that is, does this case need to stay in law or does it need to go in equity? That's the logic part of this. And then once you make that decision, you move into the rhetoric, and the decree is the rhetoric part of it, either the
Yeah.
decree or the adjudication in law, and
And I will
that's the
say
rhetoric part.
the logic part is the coming to conclusions part, which means looking at the subject matter, looking at the merits of the case, and being able to come to a conclusion using logic, and then you move into the action side, or getting a decree.
Right, the rhetoric part, which is actually
Yes.
explaining how you came
Yeah.
to this part. Yeah,
Therefore, it's that word therefore.
exactly. Yeah,
Use
yeah,
that in a lot of, because an affidavit is made up of averments, and each averment is a statement and a claim. And, depending on how you're structuring your affidavit, you list out all your claims and your averments. And then after that, you would write something, because of the aforesaid, therefore, that is your coming to conclusions. You lined out all the facts. This is where you're coming into the logic point. It's
Yeah.
like, therefore, based on the aforementioned averments and facts, blah, 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 blah. And then you present it. And then there's there's the next stage.
The rhetoric. That's the presentation part. You actually explaining your reasoning for coming to
Yep. You
how
got to
you
be
got
able
to
to
these
speak
points.
it now.
Yes, exactly, exactly. That's why rhetoric is an essential part of the trivium. And everybody needs to study it because if you don't know how to communicate, you don't know how to do anything. And I learned this way too late in life because I used to not be a communicator at all. I used to hate talking to people. I still don't enjoy it that much, but here I am trying to do my best to spread the word. I mean, really, just the reason I'm doing this is because I want to spread the word of God, and I am being called to do it. Um, and that is me coming to my rhetoric part of my life. That's where I really feel like I'm at, is in the rhetoric part of my life. I've been going through the logic stage, and here we are at the rhetoric part, trying to explain everything that I've learned to our audience. But anyways, that's for the next show. I'm really excited to get into the Trivium series. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun to go through that. But let's stay on subject. Let's keep here with section 7. Moving on. In this sense, equity must have a place in every rational system of jurisprudence. If not in name, at least in substance, because equity looks to the substance rather than the form. We've covered that in a previous episode. And then, so I pulled out, there is no law under heaven which is not supplied with equity. And that is from footnote 4 right here. There is no law under heaven which is not supplied with equity, for summinus just summaria injuria, or as some have said it, summina lex summa crux. I actually don't. I should have looked that up. And therefore, all nations have equity. That's what I was trying to get to there. And therefore, all nations have equity. And that is something I had a feeling about before. I kind of had a hunch that you could get that equity was in all nations, but now we just read it right there. That's just a confirmation. And this entire chapter is really just a confirmation that equity is wherever you are.
Yes. And the civil law tradition, I relating to a book I found from the 70s called The Civil Law Tradition, and it talks about the civil law as it exists right now fundamentally in basically all the countries around the earth. And that's why you can base it anywhere you go in this world where there are judges wearing black robes. They're doing either Roman law, civil law, whatever. Right there where it says therefore all nations have equity, the idea that you can only get equity here is not true.
It's not true.
You can get it anywhere.
Yep, it's not true. It's not true. So yeah, which I love, man. I love that. Just it bolsters our point that this is universal, and they can't kill it no matter how much they try. So we're going to move on to section 8 here. And in some cases, it is necessary to leave the word of the law and to follow that reason and justice requireth, and to that intent equity is ordained. That is to say, to temper and mitigate the rigor of the law. And so it appeareth that equity taketh not away the very right, but only that seemeth not to be right, but by the general words of the law. Which I like this because this goes to really the heart of the I don't trust the judges argument, you know? Um, because really what they're saying is they I was just thinking about this too. The people that say that those are always the people talking about the difference between public and private, right? Um, but the way they want to do their law is they want to do their law all in the public side while saying they're also private, because they don't want to get their case sealed and actually go behind in chambers and do an actual private proceeding in an equitable way, which I just think
because
is
they have to talk, they have to speak, and they have to know what they're talking about.
right. Right. Yeah, and if you don't, then you have that whole thing backwards, because if you're saying you don't want to go in equity because you don't trust the judges, then you're saying you want to stay in the public and fight with everybody, which is just doesn't make any sense to me. But anyways, I'll move on from that. But yeah, it's it's just wild to me. Um, uh, yeah, here's just another quote from section 8 here, since we're on that subject of mitigating the law. Equity is that which is commonly called equal, just, and good, and is a mitigation or moderation of the common law in some circumstances, either of the matter, person, or time, and often it dispenseth with the law itself. The matter of which equity holdeth cognizance in its absolute power are such as are not remediable at law, and of them the sorts may be said to be infinite almost as the different affairs converse, conversant in human life. Equity is so extensive and various that every particular case in equity may truly be said to stand upon its own particular circumstances, and therefore, under favor, I apprehend precedents not of the greatest use in equity, as some contend, but that equity thereby may possibly be made too much a science for good conscience. So I love what he's saying right here, because that's another thing that a lot of law people say, is that equity doesn't work off of precedence. That totally talked about that, right? How precedence is easier than principles.
Yeah, that it's much easier to follow what has already been done rather than creating new precedents.
Right, right. And therefore, under favor, I apprehend precedents not of the greatest use in equity, as someone contend, but the equity thereby may possibly be made too much a science for good conscience. So instead of just reading words and say, oh yeah, that's the case, I'm going to use this right here, you're actually turning law into a science for good conscience. And then, so that, if that's truly how equity works, then I do trust the judges and I do want it to go in chambers, because it's going to work off the science of a good conscience instead of these words that are written on paper in black and white and can never form to every situation under the sun like equity does, because it's on a particular case. Okay, so
I think
and
also he's almost saying exact what Tully said, which is, if we remember all the way back in the beginning of Tully's speech, that we would do away with all of the equity jurisprudence
yes,
and all of the precedents and only use the 20 maxims as a law, as a guide. Because I think what's also being said in this paragraph is that by introducing all of these different precedents into equity jurisprudence, you're almost making it too much. There's almost too much science going on for you to be able to use just good conscience, because science and law, I think, are on one side and reason and equity are on the other side,
yeah,
where it's
yeah,
like we don't want to bring in all of these precedents and everything into equity to where it's almost becoming a science just like law is, where it's like just use good reason, good conscience, don't over scientify it, if that's a word.
Yeah, it is now. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, yeah, that's absolutely right, and I think that's a great way to look about it, because, and it is harder to do that. It's harder to look at a case and be like, okay, what are the principles of this case? Not what case can I relate this to, because that's an easy thing to do. But what are the actual principles behind this? Were they following equity? Was the one seeking equity doing equity? All of these things, and that is harder to go behind, but that is how you ultimately get uh, your your um, your remedy and specific performance through equity. But we're running out of time here, so I guess I took way more notes than I needed to, but I'd rather be way over prepared than under prepared. Um, but the what I do want to get in uh, before we head to the second hour and talk about the actual because the second chapter is the actual origins of the chancery courts and how those came to be, which I think is very interesting. But before we get there, I did want to bring up a section in this, because I know Whitestone's going to like this one. And actually, I'm just going to read section 14 right into the record here, because I do think it's so important. So this is section 14 of Commentaries on Equity Jurisprudence, Volume 1. And this is what Story has to say right here. This isn't the editor's notes yet, but we are going to talk about those in just a second. So, Section 14, the next proposition that every matter that happens inconsistent with the design of the legislator or is contrary to natural justice might find relief and equity is equally untenable. There are many cases against natural justice which are left wholly to the conscience of the party and are without any redress, equitable or legal. And so far from a court of equity supplying universally the defects of positive legislation or peculiarly carrying out into effect the intent as contradistinguished from the text of the legislator, it is governed by the same rules of interpretation as a court of law, and is often compelled to stop where the letter of the law stops. It is the duty of every court of justice, whether of law or of equity, to consult the intention of the legislature, and in the discharge of the court of this duty of court of equity is not invested with a larger or more liberal discretion than a court of law, which I think that is very important for the whole law versus equity side. And the whole I don't trust the judge's argument, because really what you're is and that's why you want to keep it on the public record, I guess. But what Story is stating here is the way that judges come to decisions behind chambers is the exact, I guess, is they're going to use a similar, I wouldn't say it's exactly the same way as Story is saying here, but what is the Story is really talking about here is the equity maxim that equity follows the law. So he's saying that just because your case gets in chamber, that doesn't mean the decisions are arbitrary to the judge. He doesn't just get to act with impunity and do whatever he wants to do behind private doors. I mean, they have oaths, they have all these things that actually do mean something to these judges once they get behind chambers, and they know what equity is. If you're getting behind chamber, they know what equity is. I would go to venture to say, besides like traffic court judges, most judges know what equity is, and they know what to look for when they see it. But I just wanted to bolster that point right there. But
I would also say, sorry, I was gonna say that what people don't understand about judges is that judges truly are functionaries. Like they're there to serve a function. And a lot of these people that don't trust judges, what you're actually saying is you don't trust yourself and your own knowledge enough to present yourself in a way that makes the judge switch modes, which really is the name of the game.
yeah,
Because if you do it correctly, the judge will switch modes just like a computer, as long as all of the relevant things are in place. They are a disinterested functionary, according to my book, The Civil Law Tradition, which I have here. And that's really what it is. If you don't trust the judge, it's because the judge is seeing something that you're either ignorant of or that you haven't done, and they're just going to continue to proceed until you figure it out. So it's not that you don't trust them, it's that you're without knowledge.
Exactly, and you're offended because they know something that you don't, basically.
I'm offended because they found out how dumb I am.
Right, right, exactly. When it's really not even being dumb, it's being stubborn, is what it really is. And like I talk about this all the time. Once people find out there really is a remedy, that means they actually have to do something about the problem, and they don't want to do that. They want to bitch about judges being corrupt online, but
which really is a deeper, I think, commentary on human behavior, which is that a lot of people, they don't want to acknowledge that, hey, you don't need to be all up in arms and crying. There's a solution. And they're like, no, I want there to be a problem. I want there to be a fight. And it's like, I'm not.
Yeah, then I have nothing to fight for.
I've got nothing to fight for. It's like, you got to understand, you got to put your swords down.
Yeah, dude, that's the number one thing. You got it. The way you go to war with the federal government is by creating peace wherever you can. That's the one thing they can't combat is peace. So, anyways, I wanted to bring up that section just for the whole argument between the separations and stuff, and really to put people's minds at ease. It's okay. Equity's okay. But anyways, going on for the editor's note. I really liked this because this is the editor's note, and was written in 1918, and this is pre-merger, but obviously I kind of think this dude knew what was coming, and he's seeing what was going on. So I'm going to read this first part verbatim into the record. In some states, in a number of In a number of the states, the distinction that once existed between actions at law and suits in equity and the various forms of pleading used in different actions has long been abolished. And in civil trials, we now have but one form of action for redress of civil wrongs, denominated a civil action. An impression has been prevailed to some extent that because the distinction between actions at law and suits in equity has been abolished, the equitable rights and remedies are thereby destroyed. But no such result follows the change in forms of procedure. It is sometimes difficult to so frame issues for the injury that equitable rights and principles are presented. The purpose of the reform procedure, sometimes called the system of code pleadings and practice, certainly was not to destroy or impair those rights and remedies which the experience of the ages had been shown to be essential to a system of enlightened jurisprudence. This change in law of procedure does not destroy or merge legal or equitable rights, but as all controversies at law are to be tried by the ancient mode of trial by jury, it has been uniformly held that issues of fact raised by pleadings and actions for the enforcement of equitable rights must be tried by the jury unless waived. In the consideration of the various forms of action and proper pleadings to be used, recourse must be held to the decisions of states whose practice is being considered. For instance, 30 of the states have adopted the reform of code system of pleading and practice, and in some states, all actions are cognizable in the court of law, and in others, the distinction between the law and equity courts has been abolished. So what he's stating there is not equity isn't gone. The distinction between the two courts is gone. And basically you get equity through an administrative process. And right here, he's saying equity courts are still used in New Jersey, Kentucky, Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee. So those are the only states that still have equity courts.
That's crazy. I mean, that's only 10% of the states.
Right. Isn't that nuts? But he's also stating that that doesn't mean equity's gone. It's just in a different form. And he says it's to give people trials by jury unless waived, which I find interesting. I don't know if I totally real, but he did cite a case here to maybe we should look that case up because he cites a case for that point. That would be a very interesting case to look at. But anyways, we have reached the end of the first hour, guys. I think we're actually a little bit over. So thank you for joining us for this first hour. We hope everybody joins us over on the second hour on truelifeproduction.com. Go over there, click the banner at the top, the Learning Out Loud podcast. Go to the after you're there, click the foundations page. That will take you to all of the extra resources. You can get the full 2 hours. You can watch the video and watch us click through all of our resources if you so choose. So hope to see everybody over there, and never forget to seek truth and honor the Creator above all, and let that be the whole of the law.
Is that everyone's word should be meant for a use.
And the words that I'm using today are meant to pull down idols within people's temples.
Meaning that I want to destroy
falsities that they have idolized
for their entire life.
And just pull those out and sweep them clean. And before that temple,
and get reinfested with a new lie. Give it true life.